Hello everybody, my name is Gerard Janssen van Rensburg and welcome back to Chess with myself. Today we're covering the pride and sorrow of chess for Morphy himself. There's a lot of videos out there covering Paul Morphy, but since in this series of Uncrowned Chess Legends, I felt it was necessary to cover Paul Morphy as well. Paul Morphy. He was born in New Orleans 1837, the son of successful lawyer and judge Alonzo Morphy. His uncle, Ernest Morphy, claims that no one formally taught Morphy how to play chess, but rather that he learned the rules by observing games between himself and Alonzo. In 1857, at the age of 20, Morphy won the first American Chess Congress in New York with a dominant performance. This prompted his European tour, where he met and triumphed over the dominant masters of the period, but he could not secure a match with Howard Staunton. After the tour, he came back to America to public acclaim, but his interest in chess faded as he returned to New Orleans to start a legal career. The following quote by world champion Mikhail Botvinnik should elucidate the genius of Morphy. His mastery of open positions was so vast that little new has been learned about such positions after him. End of quote. The first game is known as Two Knights a Night. The game was played in New York 1857. Morphy was 20 years old at this time, and his opponent, Napoleon Marat was born in France 1815 and came to the USA at the age of 13. He was at the time 42 years old. So, the game started off with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and bishop c4. This is the Italian game. The nice piece development and control of the center is wonderful. Black continued with bishop c5, a classical variation, and now we get to the official start of the variation known as the Evans Gambit. In fact, a favorite of both Morphy and Anderson, in fact. It sacrifices a pawn for piece development and taking the center. Also, the dark squared bishop of black gets kicked to a worse square on the edge of the board. The reason I mention this is a favorite of Morphy is that Morphy actually plays as black in this game. He plays with the black pieces and Napoleon plays with the white pieces. It was the fashion of his time to play the Evans Gambit. I'm not going to be covering it from black's perspective, so let's continue. Bishop takes on b4 and c3, bishop a5. As I mentioned, the bishop is not on the best diagonal. d4, e takes d4, and white made a mistake with e5. The better move would have been either queen b3 or castles. Castles would have led to knight f6 or knight g to e7, followed by bishop a3, stopping the castling of black, d6, and now e5 is a move. Queen b3 is also just a very aggressive developing move of the queen, putting a battery on f7, and black would have had to play queen e7, castle by white, bishop b7, redirecting or maneuvering the bishop to a better diagonal, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop takes e4, knight c3, knight f6. And as you can see, all of white's pieces are in play, and it's simply a very nice position to play as white. But e5, I believe, is to prevent knight f6, and yet it would have been better to allow knight f6 and then play e5. So after e5 and d5 is played, it takes on d6 and passant is played, and Morphy made a small inaccuracy by placing the queen on d6, by capturing back with the queen. There is potential skewered tactics on the a3 to f8 diagonal in the future, and a better move would have been c takes on d6. White could have castled, and d5 would force white to either bring his bishop back to b3, staying into a pawn, or to actually put the bishop on a worse diagonal, and black would have been comfortably better in this position. So back to the game with queen takes d6, castle by white, knight c to e7, knight c5. So it is a mistake. It's an overly aggressive move that actually helps black to do what he wants to do, that is castle. By putting the pressure on f7, it basically forces black to castle, and that's what black wants to do. Better would have been to develop more pieces. Bishop a3 would be a developing move of tempo, forcing the queen to move. Knight takes d4, knight takes d4, and c takes d4, castle, queen b3, b6, and knight c3, bishop b7, rook a d to d1, and all white's pieces are in play, and this would have been a better continuation of the game. But knight c5 was played, allowing castle and bishop d3. Again, a better move would have, for example, been a c takes on d4, but black is already better because of knight c5. So bishop d3 is just a small inaccuracy. Regards. Bishop f5 is played, asking for trade of bishops. White obliges. Knight takes on f5, and here is the skewer tactic I talked about earlier. Of bishop a3, queen g6, bishop takes f8, and queen takes on g5. Notice that black captures the most active white piece instead of the bishop that is on the a3 to f8 diagonal, where it targets nothing of value at this moment. In fact, black has the initiative, because white needs to move his bishop, allowing for black to improve his position and generate an attack. So bishop a3 isn't the best move. I understand why it was played. He wanted to say I am a piece up, or not a piece up, but an exchange up. The only issue is bishop to b4 would have been better, offering a trade of pieces and limiting black's initiative. It should, however, be mentioned that it is in black's interest to keep pieces on the board and launch a fearsome attack instead of winning a pawn. So knight h4 would have been played instead of takes. So if he were to trade pieces with knight takes on b4, c takes on b4, bishop takes b4, black is a pawn up if he count the material. But better would have been bishop h4, g3, and knight bishop b6, knight d2, a5, followed by bishop a3, queen takes on d2, and the interesting bit is you can't take back here because after queen takes d2 there's a fork on f3, so g takes on h4 would have to be inserted, bishop queen f4, queen d3, and you can see that there is quite the initiative, the attack looming around white king. The white king is way more exposed, and I would say the rook is not felt. The exchange up is not felt for white. Back to the game with bishop a3, d takes on c3. It also limits white's development. For example, you could play this idea of knight h4, but it's simply not as good as d takes e3, because this knight has no good square to go to. Bishop c1, queen c6, bishop f4, rook d8, bringing in another piece with tempo, queen c2, and knight c to d4, centralizing the knight and bringing it into the kingside attack with tempo as well. Queen e4 and brilliant move, knight d3. In fact, for the brilliance of it, I'm going to make this a book. So, it's a brilliant move, as we can see. The idea is that white is just dropping a queen. If he trades queens, he gets checkmated in one. So, if queen just drops back to e3, the move is simply knight d to e2 check. The queen has to give up the queen, and knight takes on e2 wins the queen. It's still checkmate in that line. So the best possible continuation for white to stay in the game is actually either bishop takes f3 followed by queen takes e4, or queen takes d4 followed by knight to e2 check, picking up the queen, or f takes on f3, which again picks up the queen. But after queen takes on c6, checkmate is played in one move. This was a brilliant game, and the accuracy was in fact 97% on Morphy's part. He only made one inaccuracy throughout the entire game. So on to the next game. This game is known as Smother Nature. This game was played in Paris, 1859, and Morphy was 22 years old at this time. Sadly, there's nothing I could find on his opponent. So, this game started out with e4, and by the way, Morphy is with the white pieces, and his opponent, I believe, Screwfer, is playing with the black pieces. So, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and bishop c4, followed by knight f6. This is known as the two knights defense of the Italian game. There are multiple approaches for white in this position, namely the knight attack, most commonly known as fried liver, the modern variation which you see nowadays played, d3, and the four knights variation after knight c3. White opts to play here the open variation of the Italian d4. E takes d4 and castle. This position can be reached via the Scots game, and it is known as the Scots Gambit. To point out how it can be reached, d4 instead of bishop c4, e takes d4 and bishop c4 is known as the Scots Gambit, knight f6 and castle. So, with that being said, we go back to the game, and black opts to double accept the gambit. In fact, that's the variation's name, knight takes e4 and rook e1, pinning the knight to the king. So some tactical fireworks are about to take off. The rook develops with a tempo, forcing a sequence of moves that is only moves, by the way. If either side doesn't play the best moves here, one of the two sides always. So d5, bishop takes d5, queen takes d5, and knight c3, pawn is pinned to the queen, and so queen h5 and knight takes e4, bishop e6, and knight e to g5. Black is from the look of things preparing to long castle, but knight c5 is an attempt to get rid of the bishop pair and win a pawn. A better move would have been bishop g5, developing a piece. And if you're wondering about stuff like, also it just stops long castle, but if you're wondering about moves such as f6, kicking the bishop, knight takes on f6, g takes f6, and rook takes e6 is now very much possible. Also, bishop e7 does not favor black that much. You have to take back with the king to keep the utmost amount of advantage. Taking with the knight allows knight takes d4 and you're dropping a pawn, and there's a queen trade off it. So knight to g5, knight e to g5, and the better move would have been to castle. Knight takes e6, f takes e6, and rook takes e6 is equalizing material, but black is enjoying a slightly more comfortable position. The problem is that black played here bishop b4, which is a tactical mistake, a blunder if you will. It aims to develop a piece with tempo, but it fails to the tactic of knight takes on e6. Long castle would have been better, as I mentioned previously, but knight takes on e6 would lead to f takes e6 and rook takes on e6 check, king d8, bishop e3, the pawn is pinned to the king, rook e8 offering a trade of rooks, knight takes d4, and queen takes d1 check, rook takes d1, knight takes, and rook takes with check, bishop drops back, and this position would have been very comfortable at the end of the line. But in fact, the issue is that after, if you don't take and you decide, okay, no, I'm just gonna take the rook, the problem is this drops the queen after knight takes on g7. Unfortunately, Morphy here misses knight takes e6 as well, and instead goes for the more forceful rook sacrifice. But it equalizes the game. It's a blunder. But it is not an easy move to meet and leads to a very complex position to play as black. F takes e6 is played, knight takes e6, and queen f7. Case in point to my earlier mention of it's not an easy position to play, queen e7 is a blunder, and the actual best move is king to d7, bishop f4, queen g4 attacking the bishop, c3 counter-attacking a bishop, queen takes also, it's a fork by the way, so queen takes on e6, and c takes b4, and the position is level. Although I will mention that the king is slightly open. So queen f7 is just trying to get rid of this knight. Knight f to g5 brings the knight in closer, protecting the knight and attacking the queen. The queen moves to e7, and now we see a blunder from Morphy's side. So queen e2 is not the best move, as it very well allows d7. Better move would have been to play bishop f4. With the best play after queen e2, white only has perpetual check. I'll show the lines. After king to d7, you could play queen g4. F4 leads to a slightly worse position for white, and you've got no attack on the king. So queen g4 is the logical option. King c8 anyways, and no matter what you do, if you go for knight c5 check, the king yes runs to b8. You can even play d7, king c8, and knight f8 check. Again, king b8, knight d7 check back, and e5 check back. There's just simply nothing in the position, and even after in the start, before you start your checking sequence, you could even play a3, the bishop drops back, knight c5, and again the king just goes to b8. And there's absolutely nothing for white to do in this position. Everything leads to a worse position for white after instead of the checking sequence. But black plays d6, which is a mistake. And Morphy is back in the game. But Morphy plays knight takes on c7 check. It isn't best, but now the only move for black is in fact king d8, which would lead to a very similar position of knights e6 check, king c8, and it's still an equal position. A better move that white could have played here was in fact, instead of taking on g7, the quiet developing move bishop to d2. So if black decides to play king d7 in this position, now you've got queen g4, and it's a better variation because at the end of all of the lines, after knight c4, king b8, and knight d7, king c8, knight c5, b8. I believe, yes, you've got rook e1, another piece into the action. That's an important part. You want to bring in the rook as well into the attack. If you instead play h6 here, I can play queen h5 check. And again, it's better for white. And after knight to e5, I just play f4, and I'm threatening to just win a piece. I believe after the following sequence, yes, you got this check, king d8, and queen takes on e7, king takes e7, and rook e1 is a very dangerous blow, e6 check, and this is just a better position for white. Anyways, back to the game with king d7. We have queen g4 check, king d8, and again a mistake. Knight f7 check. It is not best, as knight e4 is in fact preferred by the ensign. And in the line we see another rook sacrifice with black's king being unsafe and in the open. I will, sorry, not that knight, this knight. I'm putting the knight on the wrong spot, sorry, as being blind. So knight e4, h5, queen to g6, e5, f5. So you're allowing the queen to drop, the knight to drop, but you've got bishop g5 check, king e8, rook e1, queen f7, knight to f6 check, king f8, and the second rook sacrifice. Bishop takes e5, queen takes e5, and as you can see, it is, according to the ensign, slightly better for white, almost a pawn up in fact, and the king is very unsafe. But back to the game with knight f7 check. I, however, do like this move, as it is still very easy for black to go wrong. So queen takes f7, bishop g5 check, developing with tempo, bishop e7, knight e6 check, and the disastrous blunder king c8. As you can see, it's case in point, there was only one move to survive in this position, and that is king e8. The best white has after king e8 is yet again a perpetual check, and the capture after knight takes on a8 actually leads to a piece down position for white. So let me actually show it. So knight takes on c7, king d8. The best you can do is actually just repeat this checks, and king would just always walk back to e8. Any other place it's not good. But let's say you actually take the rook. Now you're actually going to be down a piece down the road. Bishop takes c5, queen takes c5, king c8, rook e1, and king b8. And you're just down material completely. You've got this knight is dying on the next move, no matter what you do as white, and you're just down a knight. Anyways, in this position, it is time for you to pause the video and calculate. There's a checkmate in this position, and it's in fact a very beautiful one. So in 5 seconds, or in a count of 5, I will serve a checkmate. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Knight c5 check is the first move. King b8, because if king d8, it's just a checkmate of 1. So king to b8. Knight to d7 check. King c8. Knight to b6. Again, this leads to checkmate in 1. So king b8. And now the infamous and wonderful queen c8 check, followed by rook takes on c8 and knight d7 check. A wonderful smothered. And that's where the name of the game comes from, Smother Nature. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, like and comment on the video, subscribe if you really want to. And as always, just want to mention that if you are in South Africa, Gauteng, in the Pretoria area, check out the Pretoria Chess Club. We have a Facebook page. It will be in the description of the video. And yes, have a nice time, everybody. Cheerios.